looking at, hopefully, 3 different verses today. Verses 14, 16, and 17. As we begin, I would encourage you to turn off your phones. Turn off your phones. We are looking with the subject of who do I owe something to? So I found this funny picture of a raccoon. Now you owe me. I don't know what you could give what a raccoon could give you that now you would owe them. They seem to just take whatever they want in it. Okay, so who do you actually owe something to? I find this a fascinating topic because in our culture right now, we are hotly debating, do we help people pay off their student loan? You know, they owe so much. And on the other hand, well, I paid mine back, why do I help them? Or the average car loan, isn't this impossible to believe? The average new car loan means that person owes almost $800 a month. $800 a month. Just how much money is owed. Of course, the older you get, once the kids get out of the house, we're able to pay our bills a little bit better. I found it fascinating. The average household is $100,000 in debt. Who do you owe money to? And we would think, well, credit cards. The average person has almost $10,000 in credit card debt. We just seem to owe a lot of things to a lot of people. And of course, many of us are saying, well, let's begin with the government. They seem to think we owe them too much. Well, who do I owe anything to? Paul is going to address this very question. We are looking at Romans chapter 1, verses 14. We're going to go to 17, and we'll probably do 17 next week also. Paul has been talking about his desire to visit Rome. He has been talking about the reason why we come to church, and picking up at verse 14. One of the reasons why the big reason why Paul wants to come to Rome is he says, I am a debtor, both to the Greeks and to the barbarians, both to the wise and to the foolish. And therefore I am eager also to preach the gospel to you who are in Rome. And verse 16, for I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first and also to the Greek. For by this the righteousness of God is revealed in the gospel from faith to faith, just as it is written, the righteous by faith will live. Now, again, I'm going to make reference to the Baptist Faith and Message really doesn't address this at all. Why do you come to church? And how do I incorporate this as to what I should be doing when I do come to church? And from last week, I would just share with you, I'm really, really unsettled. I don't know what to make of all of this. Normally, I can come here on a Sunday morning and just put together the Greek, share with you some advanced maybe theology, hopefully encourage you in some way. But these last few verses in Paul have really made me uncomfortable. Why do we come to church? Why do you come to church? Well, from last week, we learned that we should be coming to church for the right reasons. Not to be entertained, not to have some pop psychology, not to hear something encouraging that makes me feel better about myself. But if, as you remember from last week, the reason we come to church is primarily so that we can strengthen each other. We've got to be interacting with each other. The reason I come to church is I'm anticipating using my gift in order to strengthen each other. Somehow, coming to church, I'm going to encourage who's here, and they're going to encourage me. And somehow, in coming to church, I'm going to see how my gift impacts others for the glory of God's kingdom. And so as you come to church, you think, well, now how do I get to use my gift today? Or as you come to church, you're not expecting to hear some professional entertainment. You come to church expecting to be strengthened. Well, that means you might be really confronted with areas in your life that need to change. Or you might be presented with some things you hadn't considered before. You're going to have to interact with somebody so that you can be encouraged. And even on the way here this morning, I was talking with my wife and said, I have never really been in a church that was like that. And if we were able to go around the room, I would like to know, have you ever been in a church where this really was going on? And if we know this is what church should be like, well, now what do I do? I know this is the way church should be like, but that's not what we're doing. I know you people are like me, good Baptist, and for a long time this is what I would do. Kind of come and sit and be by myself. And because I thought I was smarter than the pastor anyway, I would have my Greek and I would read through the Greek and kind of keep it to myself because the people around me didn't know that. And I'm not much interested in connecting with others anyway. I don't watch football, so I'm not going to talk to them about that. And we kind of come here and say, yeah, how are you? Everything is fine, and then get in our car and go home. But that's not what Paul said church should be like. Somehow, we should have a church service where everyone has got some kind of time where you're connecting and sharing with each other and praying for each other and encouraging each other. And then we might have the sermon. But I've never been in a church that does that. And now Paul comes up with maybe the reason why we do that. He's going to talk about the ultimate response to salvation. Why do I behave this way? Why is this my driving force? Yes, I come to church expecting to be encouraged. I come to church maybe being confronted about a part of my life that needs to change. I come to church and I'm going to hear more about Jesus. I want to hear more about Jesus. And this is not what our culture is like. And as we begin to think about, well, how do we grow this church? I'm in conflict with the Southern Baptist Convention. They would tell us, men, anything you can do to get people to come into your church, that's what you need to do. And especially don't talk about hell or judgment, and don't talk about disagreeable lifestyles. You want to be welcoming to everybody. But that doesn't fit what Paul says he does. So now what do I do? Or how do I justify this? Or what should be my basis? Well, Paul gets to that in verse 14. And Paul is going to tell us the ultimate response. Paul says actually he's a debtor. He's in debt. I owe this. I feel obligated to do this. Now, in the original language, what comes first is the word Greek. Paul puts I am a debtor way at the end. He's making this really emphatic. So Paul says, to the Greeks and also to the barbarians, to the wise and to the foolish, I consider myself a debtor. Now, we would need to understand that word Greeks. Paul is saying to the most sophisticated in society, those who are educated. And at this time, the upper class of Rome would have studied the Greek philosophers. They would know Greek. So Paul is saying to the most educated people among you, I am obligated. That would be like us perhaps saying, to the most educated university graduates, the best of the best, the most successful people in our culture. Really? And especially at this time, Rome was very class conscious. You knew your place. Now, in some ways, we do that too. We're very aware of more economic classes than we are anything else. And Paul has put before us here the extremes to the best educated among us, To you in Rome, who are the most educated, you've read the philosophers, you know Plato, you consider yourself superior to all the illiterate, uneducated masses, and to the barbarians, the exact opposites. This is one of those words, there's a big long word for this, homopatia. It's when you say a word that sounds like what you're trying to communicate, like the word pop or the word splash. Well, to those who are educated, the barbarians just made noise. Barbar. That's what you guys sound like. Barbar. Bar. That's what you uneducated people sound like. Now, you might have done that. We would find that very racist, perhaps, or just unacceptable, but to make fun of the way someone speaks, but it was a way of saying, you are uneducated, you're the deplorable masses. I think Hillary said, you're the Walmart crowd. You're the Walmart crowd. You're not educated, you didn't go to one of the universities, you're not one of the best. Now, Paul is saying, I'm putting before you two extreme examples. And even right now, the people who heard this letter would go, huh? And he goes further, to the wise, to those that are good people. They're discerning, they're trying to do the right thing. They carefully think their way through life choices. Maybe they weren't born wealthy, but they're smart people. You've been around these kind. It doesn't matter their social status or whether they're rich or poor, but you know people that seem to be very wise. They seem to make really good choices with what they have. Discerning might be the word. It's hard for us to perhaps grasp this, but you've been around people that you think, this is a wise person. Maybe not college educated, maybe not wealthy, but they're just really wise in how they're living. And then he says to the exact opposite, to the foolish. Now, the question would be, and I think we've heard this, and I've heard this so many times, you ask somebody how to grow your church, and they're going to say, well, have you identified your target audience? And what the Southern Baptists will do for their church growth is they'll come in and they'll survey the neighborhood. Here's the demographics. Here's the economic demographics. Here's the languages that are being spoke. So what group do you want to target? What group do you want to target? Now, if these people were talking to Paul, he would go, huh? What do you mean, what group do I want to target? And as just reading this verse, you would get the idea Paul is saying, my target group is everybody, anybody. Who do we want in this church? Well, we want the most educated, the most impressive. We want those who are living on the street. We want those who seem to be really nice people. They're so close to the gospel. As hard as this might be, we were even willing to put up with the foolish a little bit. That's hard for me to do. We don't do that as a church. I remember at the church in Fremont, I had connected at school with a 12-step group, and they were looking for a church in Fremont to host a 12-step, I think it was for drug abuse, for high schoolers and college kids. Now, we didn't have any. And I thought, this is perfect. They'll come to our church, we'll be a sponsor, they'll start coming to our church. Well, I told the lady that ran the church, hey, I got this great thing, and they're going to be, we don't want those kind of people here. What? Don't we want those kind of people here? They need to hear the gospel. This is exactly what Paul is saying. We don't often do this in churches. We have our target audiences. And as we come into church, we're kind of aware of who's around us. How hard it might be to have a very wealthy person. There's a lot of problems with wealthy people. Sitting next to someone who's just coming in off the street. Someone who is just one of the best people you've ever been around. They're nice. Next to someone you think, wow, we're going to try to work with this person. I don't know. And I've been around those people. They can't put two things together without making a mistake, you know what I mean? Their car breaks down and you think, okay, you're going to do the right thing, right? You need to replace your car. But you've got all these other bills and you've got all these young kids, and the elders in the church talk to them, and oh yeah. They went out and bought a brand new Cadillac. And it's like, we're trying to help you here. And you keep making decisions that the rest of us are going, if you're going to keep buying problems, why are you here? So Paul is saying, here's my target group. As hard as this is for me to work with this target group, anybody, the most educated, the wealthiest, citizens who think of themselves as superior to anybody else, slaves, barbarians who barely speak the language, anybody. You come through the door, we want to minister to you. Paul is a good Jew. This is phenomenal. A good Jewish person would say, Paul, really? Well, first of all, the Gentiles don't deserve to hear about the Messiah. If they want to hear about the Messiah, don't they become one of us? And you want to be dealing with people that are wise. Proverbs, I know you've read Proverbs over and over again, talks about the wise and wanting to have friends that are wise, and you need to be wise. And Proverbs talks over and over again about don't waste your time with the foolish. You give them the word, they're not going to listen anyway. And so this morning, again, in one verse, I'm made totally uncomfortable. This is what our church should be like. Not just expecting to have people like us, and that's hard not to do, to people of the same general economic status, people who kind of vote politically the same way. We have a lot in common. Paul would say, well, anybody, people who look like you, people who don't. People who are the most educated that you would ever thought someone should be educated. People that can barely write their name. Anybody. So as we have community outreach, as the Southern Baptist says, have you thought about your target audience? Our response needs to be, well, yeah, because everybody needs to hear the gospel, so I'm just going to pick an audience and go for it. The wise, the poor, the wealthy, and we can even get really uncomfortable. Do you want illegal aliens in our church? Ooh, Pastor, that's a little politically uncomfortable. Where are you going with this? Are they here? Do they need to hear the gospel? Man, I don't know. This is really making me feel uncomfortable. And this idea of debtor. Well, it's interesting. In many of the commentaries, and most of the modern ones, they say, well, Paul thought of himself as a debtor because this was the gift. This was the job God gave him. God called him to be an apostle. Okay. So this is what Paul had to do. Now, there's a problem with that. Well, that means it doesn't apply to any of us, because I'm not an apostle. So how could Paul be a debtor, but I'm not? Well, Paul says, first of all, we need to understand this. This is not me trying to work my way for God to have made a good choice to save me. I'm working to pay off my salvation, I've known people who were doing that. Well, God saved me. I owe this to him. Meaning I'm doing good works to try to build up, like I'm in debt because God saved me. Well, I don't think you could ever do enough to equal what Jesus did on the cross to begin with. So how could you work to pay God back? That doesn't make any sense. So we are not trying to pay God for our salvation. I'm not trying to pay God back. I could never do that. So I don't think Paul would possibly have imagined he has to pay God back. Neither would Paul say, I have to do this because this is my calling. I know I'm called to be an apostle. He interacted with Jesus out in the desert. Paul was very clear about that. Paul would never say, well, that applies to me, but that doesn't apply to you. Paul is using himself as an example here to the church in Rome. What he's saying is, I have an obligation. Now, it's interesting. So many people miss this in the commentaries that I was looking at this week, but Martin Lloyd-Jones, that's probably a name that very few of you have heard maybe said. Martin Lloyd-Jones. He was a doctor. He left the medical practice and became a minister. And he has like 15 volumes on Romans. You want to know about Romans? You can spend the money and buy Martin Lloyd-Jones. He came up with a real clear explanation. First, how could Paul be a debtor unless something had been given to him? Now, you don't owe something to somebody unless something has been given to you. So if I meet somebody and they say, you owe me money, I might obviously say, well, I don't know who you are, and I don't think you've ever given me anything, so I can't possibly owe you money. Right? We would think along those lines. It would have to be something somebody has given me. If somebody has given me something, well then, depending on what that was, I may say, oh, you know, you covered the cost at Starbucks, no big deal. Or it might be something like, wow, you gave me something that cost a lot of money. I'm kind of obligated to be nice to you. I'm kind of obligated to pay you back. So Paul couldn't be in debt unless something had been given to him. And the argument that Paul makes, the point that Paul is going to make here is that he had received God's grace freely. We're going to see this in this letter as we keep going. It was nothing Paul deserved. It was nothing he worked for. It was nothing he finally got to the level where he achieved it. It was given to him. Now, to begin with, we need to be in that place. As uncomfortable as this is, I need to think of myself as a debtor because I didn't work for any of this. I didn't get nice enough so that God gave me salvation. Okay, you've come to church long enough. I've been checking my records. This is your 500th attendance, so you get salvation. Or maybe I've been checking my records, I looked at the ledger, and you've finally given enough money. As we read through Paul's very clear, of anybody who might have deserved salvation, who had reached a level of salvation, who finally got to the point where God said, yes, you can be saved, that was not Paul. But he was given that salvation. And our understanding, of course, needs to be, you didn't deserve it either. You got something for free. And Paul would say, now the next step. Everyone needs to hear this message. So you have something that was freely given to you, and you can share it with anybody you meet. Now that's not the way a lot of Baptists work. A lot of Baptists will come and sit in their church and say, yes, I've been coming to church for weeks, months, years. My family grew up in this church. I think I understand how this works. Well, if you come to our church long enough, we may share it with you, you know. If you come to our church long enough and can kind of pick up on it, we may let you be, you know. You have to come in and stay here for a while. You have to work for it. You have to show consistency. Paul is saying, I was freely given this gift, and so were you. And everybody around me desperately needs this gift that I have. Wait a minute, that's not just Paul's job? No. That's not just the pastor's job? No. Anybody, everybody here, you've been given the gift of salvation. Well, now you have something that everybody around you needs to hear. So Paul says, I can't wait to do this. I'm eager. Now, if you're like me, when those situations come up, you think, oh no. I think this person needs me to talk to them, and I really had other things I would like to do. I have an opportunity to share this with this person, and I think they need to hear the gospel, but am I really going to have to do this? You know, like when you sit next to somebody on a plane, you sit next to somebody at the doctor's office, and, oh, I have to talk to this person? Okay. No, Paul wouldn't say that. I'm not sure what it would be like to be around Paul. Totally different than how he was raised. Well, you only talk to those who are righteous. You only talk to those that are being good. You only talk to those that are trying to obey the law. You certainly don't talk to Gentiles. You don't talk to those that are unclean, tax gatherers. Total opposite. You're sitting next to Paul, guess what? You're hearing the gospel. You sat next to you. Are they going to hear the gospel? Paul says, I can't wait to do this. I can't wait to come to Rome, because as soon as I come to Rome, this is what I'm going to do. It's an obligation. See, something's been given to me. I didn't deserve it. It's been given to me, and now I have something that everybody needs, so as soon as I get a chance, I'm going to share this. Wow, Paul, this is different than anything I would have thought. So our church is not a club. It's not a group where we've had friendships for years and, it's hard to break into these cliques. This is a place where people come together and they say, I've been looking forward to this all week long so that I can share with you what the Lord's been working in my life. Oh, wait a minute. That sounds like one of the most uncomfortable churches I can imagine. You mean I got to talk to other people? Other people are going to talk to me? I'm going to pray for other people? Well, I think that's where Paul is headed on this, because Paul tells us in verse 16, yes, I know in Rome there are all kinds of people. I know there's citizens and slaves. I know there are the educated. I know there are the big masses of worker bees, so to speak, and they're just there trying to survive. And I know the people that we all want to have come to our church because they're kind of the up and rising people. I know there's people with money. I know there's people that aren't. Paul, what's your target group? Paul says, I'm not going to be ashamed to share the gospel with any of them. Really? I'm not going to be ashamed to share the gospel with any of them. I don't know if you've been around people that were highly educated and you thought, well, I can't talk to them because they're so smart. What do I have to say to these people? Paul says, well, you have the gospel. But they have a college education. Yeah, well, they need the gospel. Sometimes I've been around really wealthy people and you feel uncomfortable. Like, well, I'm not dressed the way they are. And I've got a car like I've only seen in magazines. And, you just don't feel like you belong. Paul says, yeah, they need to hear the gospel. I'm not ashamed. Maybe for many of us, it would be on the opposite side. Someone who doesn't meet our standards of cleanliness. I don't know if you've been around those kind of people. They are desperate, truly homeless, and they're asking for a handout. And you, I've got 5 minutes. Okay, look, you're asking me for money. Here's what you really need. You need to hear about Jesus, because that'll change your life. We would find that, they're dirty and I don't even know if they're sober. Paul said, for I'm not ashamed. I'm going to share this with anybody. For this is the only way anybody gets saved. There is no other way. There's no other possible way to do this. And if this is the only way that anybody can possibly get saved, then I need to share this with the Greek, with the barbarian, with those who are the most impressive in our culture, to those who are the foolish. It's, they aren't going to find any other way unless I share it with them. This is the power of God for salvation. Not only to the Jew, who this was promised to, but all the Gentiles, all the Greeks, because there is no other way. Paul has a target audience of incredibly anybody. And yes, I know, practically speaking, if we were going to do a mass mailing, we might want to pick certain demographics. But Paul says actually anybody is your target audience. Paul says you are motivated because you received this freely, and you have something that everybody around you desperately needs, and you can share it with them. So that's why you do this. And Paul says, I am eager. I'm eager to be a part of this church. I'm eager to contribute. I'm eager to put my money in the plate. I'm eager to talk about missions. I'm eager to talk about community outreach. We don't keep it to ourselves. Why? I'm not ashamed. Anybody, college educated, not, people who can barely write their name. Why? Because I know that this is the only truth that will ever be effective to bring somebody to salvation. There is no other way. And if you know the house is on fire and you know how to get out of the house, you tell somebody. That's hard for us to do in our culture. We think, well, I figured it out. Why can't you? I've been in those situations where people just try to have you figure it out on your own. Paul is saying, no, you have the truth. It's been freely given to you. Everyone around you desperately needs that truth. So if we're going to get together and do church right, our target audience is anybody. And we're going to be motivated because we know, well, I got this gift of salvation free. I didn't earn it. I never can earn it. It's not about putting money in the plate. It's not about how my parents were born in this church. I didn't deserve it, and God gave it to me anyway. I'm going to share that with everybody around me because everybody around me needs to hear the truth of Jesus, and I can't wait to get to it. Man, that would be a different church. So, why do you come to church? I'm going to connect last week's and this week's. Why do you come to church? Paul would say, you come to church because you can't wait. You can't wait to come here and use your gifts that have been given to you. You come here because you can't wait to encourage other people. This is how God's been working in my life this week. You can't wait to get to church because you want to hear more about Jesus. You want to be strengthened. You don't need to be entertained. Yes, I'll tell you, my least favorable kind of way of dealing with people who don't preach the truth, I'll actually get up and walk out. I have come to church to hear the truth presented. If you're going to talk pop psychology, if you're going to talk about some feel-good stuff, you're wasting my time. I'm going to leave. And that means when you come to church, you desperately want to hear the truth. Preacher, don't talk to me about football. Tell me about Jesus. Preacher, don't talk to me about politics. I need to hear more about what our church should be like. And I'm going to hold you accountable to it. Okay. Then I'm going to come here and preach the truth. And that means when you come here, you want to see how that's working out in each other's life. Now, as I said last week, I'm feeling very uncomfortable about all of this. I don't know if you're like me, you would just want to come and sit in the pew where you normally sit, make sure someone else doesn't sit in your place. Just kind of worship God on your own. If someone's going to talk to you, say, yeah, everything's going great. How about those Raiders? And then we get in our car and we leave because, my faith is very private and my personal faith is not your business. That's our culture. That's what we do as good Baptists. We feel comfortable in churches like that. You can come and sit in the back row and know people aren't going to bother you. Paul is saying that's not church. Your church needs to change. Now, as I said last week, I don't know how you would change this church to be that different. How would we do Sunday morning service where there's time for you to talk to each other? Not 3 minutes because we're running a little bit late and we'll start the service at 5 minutes, 11:35 instead of 11:30. I don't know how we're going to do this. Paul would say you need to have time where you're getting together as a group where you can check up on each other. You can encourage one another. You can pray for one another. In our budget, we need to have this understanding. Our target, our goal is not to keep the doors open necessarily. Our goals are, how do we reach anybody? Anybody. If we had a dramatic outreach that had everybody in series coming to us saying, how can you tell me about this? But somehow the doors closed the next day, and I don't know how those two things would go together. We would say, no problem. We reached everybody. They heard the message. Many people came to know who Jesus was. We lost our building, so what? But that's not our concern. Our concern is, first of all, we need to keep our building up, and I understand that, and we need to make sure the maintenance is taken care of, and I understand that, and if we have anything left over, we'll talk about maybe doing something for the community. I'm putting those together, and they don't seem to connect. So yes, these past couple of weeks, I've been very uncomfortable. I've never been in a church like that. Never. I've always been in churches that were ran by a few people. I've always been in the typical Baptist church. This is the way we do things. I've always been in a church, for the most part, where people didn't get in your business. That's not the way it should be, though. And so we come to the verses this morning and we say, wow, our church needs to be different. What do we do? Well, following Jesus has expectations. Paul is telling us if you're really following Jesus, you're getting together as a group and you are interacting with one another and you're encouraging one another. You're strengthening one another. You're sharing the truth with one another. Or be honest, you're not. You're not really a follower of Jesus. If you're a follower of Jesus this morning, you recognize you are a debtor. You have something that everybody around you needs, and it was given to you for free. And to ask yourself, how eager are you to share the truth with anybody around you? How eager are you to do that? This is the same kind of idea that Paul gave us earlier in this chapter. I can't wait to come and see you guys. The same kind of motivation. I can't wait to get to church on Sunday morning. I'm going to see people I've been praying for. I get to use my gifts. I'm going to be encouraging people. Same kind of idea. I can't wait to share the gospel with people because they need to hear it. It's hard for us to do that, though, isn't it? We feel uncomfortable. We're getting out of our little safety zones. So as I read this week, as I was studying this week, I thought, man, I don't know. I don't know how to make a church like this. I know how to get in front of you and preach. I know how to share the Greek with you. This is the point of the text. How do we get together as a group and really connect and pray for one another and encourage one another instead of going, hey, the service is starting late. And we got things to do. Wrap it up. Those are kind of different things. I've actually been in a service where the people started jangling their keys. Hey, Pastor, you're starting to go over here a little bit. Wow. Okay, I don't know. I've presented the truth to you. Now, how do we put this together? Man, I don't know. As hard as it is for me to kind of grasp at this moment, I desperately need to interact with you and for you to encourage me. I kind of struggle with that idea. Really? I need to interact with Butch and Richie and Ron and John, or I'm going to be less. I'm going to be missing out if I don't interact with Sid, if I'm not praying for Sid. And How do we put this together? Okay, we need to think about this. I think we have a council meeting coming up. Do we just keep doing church because, well, this is how we've always done it? Or do we say, somehow, I've been listening to the pastor, I'm feeling uncomfortable, but maybe we need to do things different? That's where I'm at. I've never been in a church like that. I've always been in churches normal. Here's the people who run the church. Try to entertain me on Sunday morning. Don't bother me. I'm going to get in my car and leave. But that's not what Paul says our church should be like. Let us pray. Our Father, we have come together this morning and heard truth that doesn't match with what we would probably feel comfortable doing. We've heard truth this morning that calls us to maybe open up our lives so that others can connect with us, and then we have to share. We have heard truth this morning that tells us we need to get out of our comfort zone and be willing and ready to share your truth with anybody. We would pray for the direction of the Holy Spirit to help us take this in and process it and make responsible decisions that we might reflect your kingdom and everything that is done here. We pray these things that we might truly be a church that is more of an honor and glory to what you have done in our lives and in this church. We pray in the name of our risen Lord. Amen.